Welcome back. My name is Ryan Miller, and I'm a clinical therapist answering therapy related questions from Quora today. And as always, if you have your own questions, throw them in the comments or your own responses because I get stuff wrong. But point being, we have more questions, and we'll see how many we get through. Probably a handful. But anyway, first question. Why do some therapists refuse to meet with clients that are under the influence of drugs? For example, cannabis and benzodiazepines. Okay, so they gave specific examples, but on a broader scale to answer that question, why do what is it? Some therapists specifically, why do we refuse to work with clients that are under the influence? The answer is in the question. The same reason we acknowledge that consent ends when cognizance starts to dissipate. There's a line for this. But yeah, you're not in the right headspace, so we're not going to do work with you. The same reason you can't go to work, same reason you can't consent to things or sign off on things when you're under the influence, technically, because you're not in the right headspace to make decisions. Therapy is something that gets potentially deep into your mind and your conscience and your psyche. And if you're coming in a, let's say, misused or influenced way, it doesn't really set you up for success. There are drug induced experiences related to therapy, ketamine therapy, psychedelic therapy. So, there are routes for this, and people who have legitimate medications might come in on those medications. A lot of people are on medication for ADHD and depression. Are they allowed to attend therapy while on those? Sure, they can assist in the process. So the question really is, how much in your proper headspace are you? And that's where the line gets a little bit fishy. If someone's had a drink of alcohol at all that day, can they come to therapy? Probably. If someone's drunk, can they be there? No. Even if they've been dropped off, we're supposed to turn you away. If you're high, we're supposed to turn you away. Now, this does come down to a question of, well, caffeine's a drug, and a lot of people are actually addicted to caffeine, but it's a socially acceptable drug, and we don't point it out when people have addictions to it. But stop drinking caffeine for a day or two, and if you start getting headaches and have really bad physiological responses, you're probably addicted. Do we see people when they are overdosed on caffeine? We do. So, really, where's the line there is the question. And I think there is a line for sure. Again, the issue is where do we draw it? And I think for most people, most therapists, it really comes down to, are you under the influence of, gosh, not even just drugs, because I just gave examples of that. Illegal drugs for sure. Um, Mind altering drugs, which again, a lot of things count as mind altering. But definitely all illegal drugs, alcohol and marijuana, you can't be coming in under the influence of that. Um, it's more of a legal ethical issue of, are you in the right headspace to be making decisions or not? So that's that. We're going to move closer. I did this last time too, made the same mistake. Closer. There we go. So yeah, it says, why do some therapists refuse? I think most should, but again, they use benzodiazepines here. It does just depend on what you're under the influence of. So yeah, it's a good question. I'd recommend don't really attend any medical thing under the influence unless that's part of the therapy. And really, I think that should be happening while you're there, whether it's part of the therapy or the experience. Just like you don't go to the dentist's office to get your wisdom teeth pulled and you've already dosed up on anesthesia. You just, anything that's going to be utilizing drugs of any sort, or substances of any sort, it's probably going to be done on site. So, and under monitor. Yeah. Question two. What safeguards exist for probationary and newly graduated psychologists? Who makes sure that these clinicians are up to scratch? I can't speak to psychologists, but from a clinician, a general clinical standpoint, there are laws and regulations and statutes and guidelines for a newly graduated therapist. So, um, I'll use my field, marriage and family therapy. Once you graduate, you get a temporary license. You can apply for a temporary license, which is just more of a courtesy until you've taken a licensing exam. So these temporary licenses typically don't last for very long, a couple months, maybe a year or two, actually, but you can't renew them. So you're allowed to practice while you're training for your exam, because when you graduate school, you don't have a license. Your degree just gives you permission. Essentially, your entire schooling up to that point is just to get permission to take a licensing exam. So just graduating doesn't mean you can be a therapist. It just means you're now allowed. You have permission to take an exam, which you can then fail and not become a therapist. I've never met someone who's failed it, but so point being, it's not this horribly scary. I mean, people stress out about it, but it's not very easy to never become a therapist after you've gotten the degree. You just study and take the exam. So, yeah, temporary license. I'm licensed in 2 states. They do languaging different, but everything's functionally the same. So I believe in Kansas, you're TLMFT. I think temporarily licensed married to family therapist. In Missouri, I believe you're a PLMFT, provisionally licensed. They both just mean you're getting this license as a courtesy. And then you take the licensing exam. You have to apply for it, take the national level exam. So there's only one exam, and then once you pass it, you submit those results. There's a standard level and a clinical level. So if you pass at the standard level, you can be licensed, but you're not allowed to be clinically licensed until you take it again and pass at the clinical level. So the goal and the hope is that you pass it at the clinical level the first time, which when I took it was like you needed 15, I think, more points, give or take, out of like 180 or something. So you need a decent percentage more correct answers to have the clinical license, and then you don't have to retake it when you become clinically licensed. So yeah, you do that, and you have to do supervision for. In a lot of cases, you have to do weekly supervision of some sort. There's different rules and guidelines around how much of that has to be individual supervision, group supervision, dyadic supervision. So individual will be like you as a student and me as a supervisor, or at this point you're a post grad. You're in training, postgraduate training, getting all your hours, and I'm the clinical supervisor. Dyad would be me as the supervisor and two of you, and then group would be me as a supervisor and three or more people in that space receiving supervision. So there's certain rules about how many of each of those hours you can get. Um, and it's pretty common that you need to have one supervision per 15 client hours you see a week. So there is actually a ratio that you're supposed to abide by in order to meet that requirement. And yeah, a lot of people, the fastest you can do it is about 2 years, and a lot of people take longer. The common timeline is 2 to 7 years, depending on how many hours you get, because you have to have so many hours post grad to then get your clinical license. And then at that point, no one's required to oversee you. I actually think it's wise to continue doing supervision. I think it's actually uh, unwise to just stop and to not have anyone oversee your work because you're not there yet. You haven't arrived. It's good to keep studying. So, not required, but it's useful and I think wise. So, and who makes sure clinicians are up to scratch? Technically, just your supervisor. So when you apply for your license, your supervisor has to sign off that they believe that you are fit to do this work. Uh, in my opinion, no supervisor should ever sign no on that because if you're not fit, they should be telling you that very quickly, and they should either encourage the board to remove your license and stop supervising you, or they should work to train you more. But you shouldn't get through the whole process and then have a supervisor say, no, they're not fit. That's, to me, a poor supervisor, and that's a very cowardice way to handle it. If you see that your student isn't ready, you need to tell them. And if you're not comfortable telling them, then there's other issues at hand. Either they're extremely scary or you are not mature enough to do that work. So you need to be on it to make sure they're doing their work properly. So that way, by the time they hit that point, you can easily say yes. And any issue or concern you have needs to be vocalized to them If you can't do that, you need to refer them to a different supervisor. If it feels dangerous or scary, you need to report them to the board and help allow their license to lapse. So yeah, that's kind of that process, and I'm sure it looks a little bit different between all the five major disciplines, but that's kind of the gist of it. So, and then the five being marriage and family therapist, counselor, social worker, psychologist, psychiatrist. Again, this asks for psychologists. There's your answer for therapists. So that's that one. Okay, question 3. How much money can a psychotherapist make in April 2025? I'm interested in studying psychotherapy, but wonder if an experienced psychotherapist would recommend such a career to a loved one or significant other. Okay, so that's actually two different questions for question 3. So I'll answer both. How much money can a psychotherapist make in April 2025? So very fresh question. If you're watching this, we're in May. This is a month old. The the answer, how much can they make? So a typical therapist makes between like 30 and 40,000 a year ish. Um, Most therapists I know either have a second job or they have a spouse that works uh, as the primary breadwinner. How much can you make? Uh, Hundreds of thousands of dollars for sure. It depends on your model and what you're doing. Um, the most money I've ever seen someone make, who I know them personally, is $200,000, over 200,000. Um, that's in the Kansas City metro. To be fair, that's a very uncommon number. Um, Most people, like I said, are in that 30 to 40,000, I think. Yeah, most therapists don't make a lot of money. In my humble opinion, I think there's no reason to make that little, um, unless you just want to make that little amount because you want to work an agency or you want to charge less and you have the means elsewhere. Also, when I say you want to work an agency, that doesn't necessarily mean you want that income, but you are told in advance what that pay is going to be. Therefore, you're agreeing and you're okay with that. So yeah, they probably underpay in a lot of scenarios, and then you can set your practice up to underpay you or overpay you. Some people do charge more than they should. So yeah, it's definitely not a field that you want to get into if you want to make lucrative money. And I've never met a therapist who their first thought was like, how can I make money? And then they come into this field. I have met therapists, myself included, who say, I want to help people and make money. I think there's nothing wrong with that. I think more therapists should have that mindset because you absolutely can make money and do this work. Um, and I've said it in other videos before. I think the field is heavily oversaturated with a lie that you have to just be poor and give yourself no life to do this job. And it's just not true. So you can help a lot of people and make okay money, if not really good money compared to other people. So, yep. If you're getting into this field and you just want to do a normal job, you should expect to make maybe 40,000 a year. If you're entrepreneurially minded and you're ready to work hard and put in effort, you should expect to make 80 to $100,000 if you want to put in the effort. And that is a lot of effort. You're running a small business in order to make that kind of money in most cases. And then geographically where you're at matters too. If you're in Southern California versus a really small town in whatever the cheapest state is, fees will reflect the area as well. So, some people are charging $250 an hour as a standard fee in expensive areas. In other areas that are less expensive, it's $100 in terms of expensive to live. So that matters too. So bear that in mind. Yeah. The second half of that question, or the second question within it, was I'm interested in studying psychotherapy, but wonder if an experienced psychotherapist would recommend such a career to a loved one or significant other. I recommend most people do not go into this field. I've never had someone that I've recommended this to. I've had people ask me about it, and I think most people are not a good fit. I think um, most people have no idea what it requires to do. They think about the schooling. They think about, oh, let me look at how much I'll make, like the first part of this question. But they never really look at the sacrifice emotionally and mentally to do this. You go to grad school, and there are definitely more intense graduate programs. The difference is you have to learn so much about what therapy is, and a lot of it is experiential, meaning you have to do it. It'll draw quite a lot out of you. So if you're not really ready to really dissect and kind of destroy yourself in the process, not necessarily to a negative end, but you're going to be pulled apart. And because of the way these programs are set up, they have to teach you, then you're on to the next class, then the next class, then the next class. So they will rip you open, and then it's your job to sew yourself back up. They're not going to do that for you. They'll be empathetic, but the expectation is that as you're getting dissected while these theories are being practiced on you, and while you're being just asked to draw stuff up, uh, they're going to push a lot to get that happening, but they're not going to do much to help close you back up and make sure you're okay. So that's on you, and you have to be ready for that. Um, yeah, it's also let's see. Yeah, it's also an extremely left leaning field. So that's something to know where if you're left leaning, you're going to be really at home with a lot of people. If you're right leaning, it's going to feel probably pretty hostile most of the time. There's definitely pockets of both and extremes of both and kindnesses in both. But the field is definitely dominated by left leaning individuals and all the ideology that comes with that. So, a lot of the field is steeped in science and fact, but anything that's theoretical or more liberal arts leaning, um, your instructors and the community at large are going to really take every chance they can to make sure that's presented through a left leaning lens. So if that's a problem to you, you should know that heading in. For any reason, if you just want a mixed field or if you are politically leaning one direction and you want to have an idea of what you're getting into, it's dramatically that direction. So that can deter or encourage some people. I personally think the field needs to be much more split down the middle because our job is to connect with clients and what they need and where they're at in life. And when you have an extremely left or an extremely right leaning field, there's a high chance that you're not going to be able to have enough people who can attune properly to people on the other side or down the middle. And when one is leaning heavily one direction, it skews what they even think the middle is. So a field that's heavily left leaning like this one, their definition of the middle is often skewed because they're talking to left leaning people. So it's like super left and then kind of left is their version of middle. This happens on the right too. Left, I think, is overall more kind of extreme in that width and right leaning spaces. If everyone's on the right, then your definition of more centrist is still right leaning. So it helps to have a mixture of that to really understand viewpoints properly, to understand your clients properly, to hear something that maybe offends you or just catches you off guard and not to immediately think wrongly of that person, but to understand that people are complicated. So if you can balance your sense of self and your understanding that people are more than just the first things that come out of their mouth, especially in a therapy setting, then you should be fine. So I guess I'm more speaking to a community element, or if it's important for you to have a certain type of community politically, just know that about this field. Um, and I'm sure that changes depending on your location. I I'm in Kansas City, which is really every city is more left leaning than right, so rural is probably going to look different. But even going to the national conference for marriage and family therapists, which is national level, so people are coming from all over the country, extremely left leaning, so heavily. So I do think it's a national thing. So politics, if that matters, um, you're going to get emotionally cut open if that matters. Um, and man, the universities just kind of accept anyone. You can be pretty awful and still get into a lot of these schools. So, um, just going into them, I wish that there was more, honestly, more red tape, just because we're putting out so many therapists and a lot of them just aren't very good at what they do. And then they mess with the market because there's too many people doing that job now. And there's definitely areas where there's less. In Kansas City, I think we're getting too many. And the bar to do this job feels like it's staying static or moving down. Like it doesn't take much to do the job in terms of getting permission. So I think we could up the standards and help, people who are on the fence just not do it because it's lends well to people who really want to help. So very long-winded answer. But I think those things are under talked about and worth considering. And I'm not the only opinion to listen to, but I never hear those things brought up, and they're very, very, very true when you. I was gonna say when you look at the information, but all you have to do is experience the field, and that's just true. So Yeah, great question. Okay. Whew. Question 4. Is it appropriate to provide feedback to your therapist about their treatment methods or approach towards you? Not only is it appropriate, I would argue it's required for therapy to work, because if the therapist doesn't know where you're at, they can't do their job well. They can't know what's working. And we have our theories that we practice within, and our interventions and our modalities that we use. And if you're pretending they're useful and they're not, that only hurts you. It only hurts you. But the less we know about that, then the less we're able to contribute and help. So I'll speak for myself. I really want to know what's working and what's not. So yeah, provide feedback, please. And if your therapist can't handle that, I mean, this is what's great about providing feedback, is it only benefits you. Of course, you can be a jerk about how you do it, but if you're just offering genuine feedback, if you're just saying, "Hey, here's my input on what's working." And I think from time to time it is good to make sure that your therapist, I mean, I try to make sure I'm checking in semi periodically. How's everything going? I try to preface certain interventions. This doesn't work for everyone, and I try to get their thoughts. How is that for you? If it's good, great. Go use it at home and outside of therapy. If it's not good, we don't need to do it anymore. There's some that I still push people, like, this is helpful, even if it's hard for most people. But if a client's just adamantly saying this isn't helpful, it's not helpful. And even if it is technically helpful, but they don't like it or don't believe it is, then it's not going to help them because their headspace isn't there. So we need to meet people where they're at. And it is pretty rare that an intervention or an approach works for everyone. A phrase that I like, um, well, it's my own phrase, but I like to say it a lot, is research that has a 95% effective rate, which is really good. Like, something that is 95% effective is extremely reliable, but it also means that 5% of the time it's not effective. And if I meet with 100 clients and do the same intervention and I tell all of them this is a foolproof intervention, it has an extremely high effective rate, and it's one of the most backed approaches, it still means that 5 out of 100 of them it won't work on. And so for me to just pile drive everyone and say this works, you need to do it, it's just illogical. Even 95% effective, 5% won't be affected well by it. So having some humility with the approach, and that's where we should hopefully as therapists be making a space where a client can say, hey, this isn't helpful for me. So when I say it's only beneficial for you as a client to tell your therapist your honest feedback, it's only beneficial because if you tell them that and they can hear it, then we can adjust, and we can attune better to the client. But if you tell them and they get mouthy with you or they make you feel uncomfortable, then great. Now you know that about them, and you can decide if you want to move on to a different therapist or not. So, and some therapists have a specific approach that they use, and if it's not helpful, it does make sense that they refer you out. There's a line between a therapist adjusting in the space to help versus now it's not what they do. So therapists also need to respect if there's a certain approach that they do. Yeah, and it's not working. Okay, this is how I do it. So I'm probably not a good fit. We're going to move you on to someone else. So again, in my opinion, it's only helpful to give feedback. So yeah, it's a good question. And um, it's hard to know these things because it's such an isolated process and you're alone a lot, client and therapist. We don't do a lot of comparisons. So I think it's great. So, okay, we'll do, I think, one more question. So, question 5 or 6, depending on if that other one counted as two. And our final one. Is it common for therapists to touch their clients on the shoulder or hand during therapy sessions? Isn't this an invasion of the client's private and safe space? That's also two questions. Is it common for therapists to touch their clients on the shoulder or hand during therapy sessions? No. That depends a little bit on what percentage of the time counts as common. It's not majority of the time. It's probably not even 10% of the time. The difference is it's probably that same therapist doing it over and over. So for me, I'm actually a very physical person in my personal life. I am a big hugger. and I'll shake your hand, I'll pat you on the back. I do not do that for my clients at all. Um, I let them lead always. So even introducing myself, I don't reach my hand out. If they reach out to shake my hand, I shake their hand. Occasionally, I've had kids who want to give me a hug or adults that do it. I allow that, reciprocate that. I don't think I've ever, I don't think I've ever initiated touch. I think one time I patted someone on the back after they had an intense session where we brought in a difficult family member. Um, and I think I just was like, well done. That was good. Just as an encouragement. I think it's the only time. And it was very much like a nice kind of it. So there's a couple ways to look at this. One is it's circumstantial. There's a really good book by Irvin Yalom called The Gift of Therapy, and it's pretty much a bunch of vignettes of his therapy experience, and it's a challenging book in a lot of good ways. It shows the beauty of therapy, but it also shows some of the nuance, and he's got a couple examples of physical touch with his clients that when you read it, it feels really beautiful, but you can also think immediately as a therapist, all your ethical red flags go up. And you're like, oh my gosh. But in the context of what that experience was, it not only makes sense, but you could argue it was the right choice. And so, yeah, it depends on the therapist. And most therapists who offer touch are clear about that early on, and they have a way that they approach it. It's also not uncommon for therapists to occasionally say like, "Hey, do you need a hug?" That happens too. So understanding that when we do this deep relational work, a lot of the times we're working through an absence of affection in someone's life and an absence of love. And then to hold a professional space and be cold can feel really odd. So being professional in a affectionate, caretaking, and loving way is really an odd mix. And so it's really unnatural in a lot of ways. So there are absolutely times where it makes sense to say, hey, do you need a hug? What do you need right now? Some therapists will move to the if they're sitting in a chair and there's a couch with one person there, they might move to the other side of the couch to get close. I do not do that. I think that rides the line. Um, like I definitely I see that more from female therapists working with other women. Uh, as a male, I definitely wouldn't do that. Personality wise, I really wouldn't do that. I try to give that space to my clients just in general. Although my office, my chairs are actually close. One thing that people have commented who also use my office is sometimes they're like, wow, we're really close. A lot of offices, they're spread out. There's about 4 feet between the front of each of our chairs in my office, which is pretty close to clients to the point where like if you're both leaning forward, you can like bump elbows kind of thing. So some people would say that's too close for comfort, and so yeah, there's a lot that goes on. Is it common? No, overall it's not, but there are people who that's their approach, and it can be done very, very well. Um, but client autonomy and comfort is is the paramount thing to navigate, and that can be difficult. Isn't this an invasion of the client's private and safe space? It's only an invasion if it's uninvited. So, I mean, that's the difference between an invasion and an invitation, really. You're invading my space if I don't want you here. You're welcome in the space if I want you here. It's all determined by the recipient. Now, there can be intent involved in that. So, someone might say, "Hey, I really want your affection, but you're coming in so aggressively that I don't want the aggression." There's that nuance, more on a personal level. But from a invasion of clients' privacy and space, the whole therapy experience is their private and safe space, not the bubble of their chair. So ideally, they shouldn't be working with a therapist if they don't feel like that office and the therapist is safe. Now, we can break trust and safety. The room should be, we shouldn't break it, but it happens. Hope that was a given. But the space should be continued as a safe environment. That should never be assumed by the therapist, but the goal is to build that, and as a client, for you to feel that. And then that should also be fully in line throughout the whole process with all actions that happen in the space. So if there's a hug, pat on the back, a touch of the hand, that should be fully in line with things that have been discussed, things that have been addressed, things that are ethical, and things that support you as the client. And just because you want it doesn't mean it's ethical. There is an appropriate touch, even if you want that. So the therapist has to also be mindful of what counts as that. And this is why some people just say, I just don't touch, because anything can be misconstrued. In a professional sense, that's fine. I think relationally, that can close off to real affection. But again, we're professional and relational. And if people want to err on the side of professional for their own clinical safety and just to make sure everything's okay, I think that's fine. And I think you're going to see that more with men because a lot of the time that's where the discomfort in touch comes from. Not always, but it happens a lot. Sometimes people feel this depending on what you represent. So even if you're a woman therapist and the client coming in is dealing with difficulties with how their mom treated them growing up, it might be extremely traumatizing for you as a woman to reach out for touch because it reminds them of the damage that their mother did. So this is where that whole picture context matters. But yeah, it's a good question. And it's dependent on the situation and the people. So yeah, fun, fantastic questions. I'll stop it there. We're over 30 minutes in. That's 5 to 7 questions, depending on how you view it. My final idea of that will be in the description below with how many sections I said for questions. Yeah, as always, reach out with any therapy questions, frankly. But in the comments, Adam, let me know what you want. Let me know what you're curious about. I'll probably just answer it in a future video or a quick answer in the comments or both. And as always, if you're interested in therapy services, reach out to me with the links in the description. I'm quite good at getting people connected for therapy, whether that's with me or with someone else. So, fantastic place to start is here. And I'll look forward to seeing you all next Friday. Bye.